In the previous video I prepared these parts so I could do a test fit and understand how they all go together. And now I need to start the process of significantly modifying many of these parts. I'm doing this following the advice from the HMS Hood Association. They have a comprehensive list of changes specifically for this kit that can be followed to help make this ship a better representation of Hood as it actually was. Due to the number of modifications that need to be made to these parts, I'm going to go about it quite methodically. To that end, I'll be starting with these parts and I'll be working from the bottom upwards. At the bottom, we have the Admiral's bridge, and I'll be starting with this component A18. To help me keep track of what I need to do, I've printed out the instructions from the HMS Hood Association and then underline the changes that I need to make. I'll then cross off these changes as they are completed. That way I'll be able to keep track of the changes and get through everything without losing track of what has or has not been done. I don't want to miss anything. The first change is quite simple. Remove the two small knobs. Those are these things that can be cut off and then the deck repaired. And then need to create some large rectangular square-like openings that go behind this component in this area. I won't be doing that in this video. I'm going to be focusing on the deck. If modeling the hood as sunk, which I am, I need to add a metal splinter shield around the deck, and that shield must be slightly taller than the shield in the front, which is this. Let's see what plastic stock I have. This is slightly taller, but I think that might not be tall enough. Let's see if I've got something better than 3.2. Let's put that aside. And that's narrower. 0.5 by 4.8. That's an option. 0.5. No, that's just too small. 1, that's very thick. That's interesting. 0.4, that might be a good one. Let's try this one first. Yes, I like that. That is slightly taller. That's exactly what I'd call it. It's slightly taller. So I'll use this 0.38 by 4mm strips to extend the bulkhead. So that's what I'm going to do for the splinter shield. Then there's a small triangular opening in the deck towards the port rear. Looking at the picture from the HMS Hood Association, that means there is a triangular opening pretty much in this area. And then the last thing to note is that the very rear center segment of the deck was left open. It had rails instead of a metal screen. Okay, so this splinter shield that I need to add only goes to there, like that. Okay, so first thing to do is to remove these bumps, then cut the hole in the deck, then fix the deck, and then raise the splinter shield on both sides. Normally I'm quite careful in cutting plastic so that I don't take out too large a chunk that then causes the plastic that I want to retain to become distressed. In this case, I'm not concerned about that, since I'm going to have to patch this area anyway, and the surface is just going to have a smooth finish at the end. This means that I can use the clippers quite aggressively, and I can take off as larger chunks as I like. There's really nothing to be concerned about damaging in this area. Even if I dig a little bit too deep, it's not going to matter because this area is going to have to be filled anyway. I don't even have to be careful about this little lip at the edge of the deck, because in this area there's going to be that raised balustrade, which means I'm going to have to remove this lip anyway so that I can get it to sit nicely onto the deck. So I'm not even going to bother about trying to avoid that. After cutting down the plastic as much as possible, I then use a bar file to remove the last of the excess plastic. As you can see, that lip does get in the way, but since it does need to be retained anyway and actually needs to be removed, I don't have any problem filing it off at the same time as I clean up these plastic bumps. Before I start patching the deck, I want to cut out the triangle, the port rear section of this platform. Here I'm following that image that's been provided by the HMS Hood Association. It shows quite clearly where it should be, and there are some reasonable markers as to where the edges should go. Essentially, the perpendicular edges of the triangle need to be aligned with these corners on the platform. Once I've established where the right angle corner should go, I then make a small hole using the tip of the blade. The last side of the triangle is a bit more of a guess. It's quite difficult to find exactly where I should put it. There's no obvious landmark for me to use to position it, so I just draw it on by eye.
Now that I know the area that needs to be removed, I can cut it out. The first thing for me to do is to drill a hole in a triangle somewhere that's big enough for me to get a blade into, and then put the blade into the hole and start scraping out pieces of plastic. Since this triangle is quite close to the edge, I do need to be careful. I don't want to overdo it and then snap this small bar at the back. This isn't a large area of plastic to be removed, so taking it slowly doesn't actually mean it's going to take a long time. In fact, in cases like this, taking it slowly will probably mean it'll take less time, because if you go fast and rush it, you'll almost certainly do something that causes a mistake, and then you'll have to take time to fix that mistake. After chipping away at this area for a few minutes, it's fully opened up, and I think that triangle looks like a pretty good representation of what is in the HMS Hood's image of this area of the ship. Since that went well, I can then move on to the patching portion of the build. To patch these holes, I will apply tape to the top surface where I want it to be relatively smooth. I do expect I'm going to have to put some putty on top of it anyway. But to fill the holes, I want to use super glue, and I don't want to have excess coming through onto the top of the platform that I then have to remove. So the tape will hold the super glue in place, and then I can apply super glue to the holes from beneath the platform. After the super glue has had a good amount of time to dry, I can then remove the tape from above. The tape is a bit stuck in the center where the super glue was, that's to be expected, but it isn't too difficult to remove since it isn't a very large contact area. Once the tape's off, I then give the area a good sanding just to see how smooth I can get it. And then I test the area with my tweezers to see if I can feel any holes, which I can feel, which then means that I need to finish the surface with some putty. There does not need to be a lot of putty. The surface is already quite good. There are just a few very small divots in the area. So I put on a very thin layer of putty that I'll then sand off in an hour or so's time. While the putty is drying, I'll open up the ladderways. These ladderways are quite easy to open up since I think their correct size should be the size that they are, with these bottom tabs simply cut straight off. So I cut off the plastic tabs with my clippers and then use a file to remove the remaining excess plastic to create a clean finish. After giving the putty a bit more time to dry, it can then be sanded off. Since the putty is already very thin, I don't need to use a file to remove large amounts of excess putty, so I move straight onto the 400 grit sandpaper just to smooth it off. Now that all of those modifications are complete, I can move on to the main modification that I need to complete during this video, and that's the installation of this raised balustrade. At the start of the video, I showed you which plastic stock I'll be using, 0.38mm by 4mm. This is what I have judged to be the so-called slightly taller than the Splinter shield at the front of the platform. The way I'm going to install this is to just start with a unbent piece of styrene strip that's approximately the correct length, a bit longer than it needs to be actually. And then I'm going to stick it down using super glue. And as I stick it down, I will blend it into shape. The reason why I'm using super glue instead of plastic cement, even though you would think that plastic cement would be the correct type of glue to use, considering both of these parts are styrene, the reason for that is if you apply plastic cement to styrene stock while you have it bent, it will cause the styrene to weaken and then snap. I obviously don't want that to happen. I want to have a single continuous piece of styrene balustrade around this area of the ship, and I don't want to have to patch any breaks in it. Super glue will not harm the styrene. It'll also make it a lot quicker to work with this area of the ship because I won't have to wait for the plastic cement to dry, which is typically slower drying, before moving on to the next bend on the Splinter shield. To start the installation, I'm going to apply extra thick super glue to the section near the front of the platform. Here there is already a forward section of Splinter shield, which will help me create an additional surface to bond against to increase strength, and it's also going to help me align the balustrade so that it stands vertically. Once the part is correctly positioned and the glue is then dried, I then use pliers to bend the plastic around the first corner. Once bent into shape, I then apply extra thin super glue to the gap to bond it in place, almost instantly. And then move on to the next bend, same process. take the pliers, bend it into shape, hold it in the correct position, and then apply extra thin super glue to the gap to bond it in place. And then for the final time, the sharpest bend of them all, but still not really that sharp. Quite easy for the plastic to get around a bend like that. And then finally, for the last time on this side of the platform, I use extra thin super glue to bond it in place. I now know exactly where the splinter shield should end, so I'm able to use my clippers to remove the excess and clip the balustrade to its correct length. Before I move on to the other side, I want to do a little bit of reinforcing. To do this, I'm using extra thin super glue that I applied to the inside of the balustrade across its entire length of the connection point to the platform. The process is then repeated on the port side of the ship. This time I decided that I was going to start it with extra thin super glue instead of extra thick super glue. And I'm able to hold it in place easily enough with my fingers, and I didn't think that the extra thick super glue worked all that well. The extra thick super glue takes a bit longer to dry. Extra thin dries far more quickly. So if you're able to line it up correctly and then just touch that extra thin super glue to the gap, it bonds almost instantly, which then means I can move on to the next phase of the construction, putting on the first bend for this side of the balustrade. I'm not going to walk you through the whole process again. It is basically identical to the other side of the ship, and the result is effectively the same. Well, it's just a mirror image. Since this is all glued together with super glue, it's almost instantly dry, so I can move straight on to the finishing. The only thing that I think really needs to be sorted out are the edges of the deck and the platform. I want them to be aligned. They are very slightly out of alignment. It was quite difficult to get it perfectly on the edge. So I think it's better if I just file that down a little bit to smooth it out. I don't really want there to be a step there. Then after some light filing to get that into alignment, I then apply plastic putty to the area so I can then smooth out and shape the splinter shield a little bit more. I don't want to remove too much plastic and then cause the shape of the platform to change. I'd rather fill the gaps with plastic putty and then shape the plastic putty so that there's a smooth contour from the edge of the platform to the balustrade. Think over an area like that, if there is a slight transition from the base of the platform to the balustrade, it's not going to be noticeable to the eye, but it will allow me to retain the overall shape of the platform. Once again, I'm not going to need all that much plastic putty, so I do try to keep it thin. The less plastic putty that I put on now, the less I have to remove in the future, so keeping it thin just results in less work for me to do later on. Once the plastic putty has set, I can sand it down. I'm using the grey plastic as the guide for how deep to sand. Essentially, I want to file down so that I remove all of the plastic putty on top of the grey plastic, and then contour the putty from the edge of the grey plastic towards the top of the balustrade, so that it has a smooth finish, or at least a smooth transition from the platform to the end of the balustrade. Once I have the putty in what I think is a reasonable shape, I then use 400 grit sandpaper to smooth it off. I then spray it with Mr. Surfacer. Mr. Surfacer will help fill micro scratches and create a nice surface for paint, but it will also reveal defects anywhere where there isn't a smooth finish on the putty. Since I did also make modifications to the deck, I also spray the deck portion of it. You can see the patches for those bumps that are removed were done properly, and they have completely disappeared when covered with Surfacer. As for the splinter shield, it didn't go quite as well, but it's not bad. It's still pretty good actually, and it's just going to require a little bit more sanding to remove those defects. So I do that, give it another round of sanding, and then another round of Surfacer. I'm still not entirely happy with it, so it goes through yet another round of sanding and another round of Surfacer, and I am now happy with it. Since, for a change, I remembered to take before and after pictures of this part of the ship from the same angle, I can do a transition from before to after. I think that has worked out surprisingly well. In the next video, I will continue working in this area of the ship, making modifications to the upper superstructure. There are some more platforms that need to be moved. If you would like to support this channel or see how this ship looks when it is completed, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.